first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. Joining us are Martin Hardy, the Times and Sunday Times Northern sports correspondent, and Ian Ladyman, the Daily Mail football editor. Now, after all that drama, gentlemen, in Italy between PSG and Spurs, I think the sub-editors must have obviously been watching that, because the papers have come into us a little bit late. So we'll bring you them as we get them in here live on Sky Sports News. But first, Martin, I have to get your reaction to that heartbreaking loss by Spurs, who were 2-0 up going into the 85th minute.
Yeah, it was a strange game to try and summarise. You know, a lot of praise for how well organised Tottenham were, how pragmatic they were, the three defenders. We saw from Thomas Frank's emotion throughout the game that this meant a huge deal to him. He could have been sitting now with a trophy. What a great way to start his time at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. As it is, he has a heartbreaking failure and fails to land that second trophy in 12 weeks. Unfortunate in the sense that the goals came late and, perhaps took their eye off the ball. We have to remember this is a PSG team that seems to have to play just about every week and have come from the World Club Cup extremely tired. They've only been back in training since last Wednesday, we learned. There's elements of Tottenham's game that we see a kind of a stylistic change, the long throws, the set piece dependency. That was a key feature. It leads to both goals at the end of the first half, the start of the second half. And at that point, they were pressing really hard, pressing very high. It was kind of a little bit, there was a certain elements of what Arsenal did against PSG in the second leg of the semi-final of the European Cup against them. And it worked. But once that rhythm came back into the PSG side, and there are statistics, I think Tottenham will have to change this season. They only passed the ball about 140 times to beat a very, very poor Manchester United team in the final of the Europa League. Today, I think it was about 140, 150 successful passes against 500 and something from PSG. And that meant that once PSG got their rhythm towards the end of the game, Tottenham was struggling for ideas, struggling to get out. Ramos comes on, scores the second goal with a very good header. And from there, we've realised it's not quite the lottery in a penalty shootout. But it's not a million miles away from being the flip of the coin. So I think there'll be a huge disappointment for Tottenham. I think what we have seen is the start of a change in style from Postecoglou, which is sometimes, and I did like him in the early days when everything was about going forward, but he became a bit one-dimensional at the finish and wouldn't change his tactics despite the fact he had so many players who weren't available to him tonight. We've seen a little bit of flexibility from Frank tonight. It hasn't quite worked. I think you'll be really, really disappointed about this, despite the fact that fundamentally everything starts at the weekend in terms of the serious stuff for them. But it would have given them a great boost to the start of a managerial campaign, and it was so close.
Yeah, Ian, let's get to your paper, the Daily Mail, calling it a Spurs shocker. Is it a case of new era at Spurs, but same old Spurs?
Well, that's the problem with Spurs, you see, is that it's about perception, and it's about some of the things that people say about them. And I suppose you look at this game, you think, does it really matter? It doesn't really matter that you lose it. It's a glorified friendly, really. PSG have not been back in training for very long, as Martin alluded to there. And it actually would have been quite okay for Tottenham to lose this game. The problem for Tottenham is not that they've lost, but how they've lost. Because if there's one thing, or one of the key things that Thomas Frank has got to change in his however long it is that he spends at Tottenham, it's this idea that Tottenham have a tendency to shoot themselves in the foot, that they snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, or however that phrase goes, turned on its head. And that's exactly what they've done. It's his first competitive game, and that's exactly what has happened. They've played pretty well against the champions of Europe, and they've come very close to beating them, but they haven't. And then they've had the lead in the shootout and looked like they might beat them again, and they haven't. So they've lost it twice in the space of one night, and that is for Thomas Frank the problem. The first opportunity to put a foot forward, actually, what he's done, sadly for him, unfortunately for him and his team, is done a little bit of what many of his predecessors have done. So, look, Thomas Frank isn't going to be losing sleep over this, I wouldn't imagine. As Martin says, the serious stuff starts at the weekend against Burnley. But perceptions are important. Perceptions outside are important. Perceptions within that dressing room are important. The way that players feel are important. They've come off a really, really difficult season last time round. It ended in an incredible night of glory, as we know. But from a league point of view, it was very difficult. All those players, or some of those players, will still have that in their bones. And this is an opportunity for them to start to shake it out, and they fluffed it. So they play Burnley at home, and then guess what? The week after, they're away at Manchester City. So I think they need to hope for something solid, something dependable, something other than what we saw tonight against Burnley. Otherwise, I'm afraid, rightly or wrongly, fairly or unfairly, those questions will be hanging in the air again as they go to the Etihad in about 13 days' time, or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, Martin, Ian said it there, didn't he? Spurs do have a tendency to shoot themselves in the foot. They do have this reputation. And after winning that trophy last season, their first in 17 years, fans might have expected a different Spurs performance tonight where they didn't shoot themselves in the foot. How deep-rooted is this issue? And what does Thomas Frank have to do to get round it?
Well, we do have to remember this is just the start of his time there. And as I said at the start of what I was saying about the match, it was a very pragmatic approach from Thomas Frank, and I think we'll get that a lot more. You are playing against what I consider the best team in the world by a great deal, and once they click and once they bring on some of their substitutes who are top notch, Tottenham were starting to struggle. But let's remember, Thomas Frank has taken over a team here who got finished with 38 points last season, at the 5th worst defence in the Premier League, and were 4th bottom of the division. So he's not taken over. He's taken over a team that won in Europe in a competition that didn't have a massive amount of great teams in it. It's funny how quickly the narrative could change, because if he'd won tonight and it was very close, then it's a European win, and what a great start for Thomas Frank. As it now happens, because they've lost, you remember all the failings of last season and inside this team, and you realise that there might not be that much change in terms of personnel. Who I did think was a standout tonight was Kudus, who showed real invention, power, determination, had a great first half and showed something different. Tactically, I think it was a lot different to what Postecoglou has done. It got a little bit more of Richarlison by playing the 2 players up front. The three in midfield looked a little bit more compact until that final 25 minutes of the game. You don't get a job like Tottenham if everything was great before you. So he has to change it and he has to implement things. And I don't think Tottenham fans, I'm not sure if they agree with this or not, but that trophy shouldn't gloss over a lot of the failings of this Tottenham team and perhaps this Tottenham club and certain historical elements that Ian has alluded to there. I think on that flight home tonight or tomorrow morning, Thomas Frank will have seen the starts of the team that he wants to build. Whether or not he can get rid of that kind of that it's Tottenham, Roy Keane, Sir Alex Ferguson criticism that was thrown at them, we will see in time. It was very close. I think that they will need to play a lot better as the season goes on. They nearly sneaked past, I think the best team in the world at the minute. But there were reasons for PSG's failings in that first half, and a lot of it was fatigue. We'll see how Tottenham develop. It's actually not a bad start for Thomas Frank, I think, despite the fact they've lost.
Yeah, Ian, it's not all bad for these Spurs fans watching this match, are they? There was a good performance from new signing Kudus. Palhinha made his competitive debut, a goal for the new captain Romero. There are plenty of positives to look forward to for the coming season, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of why I say that it kind of doesn't matter, but it also does matter, if you know what I mean. I think Palhinha is a great signing, by the way. I was a huge fan of his when he was at Fulham. I know they're very disappointed when he left. He's a really, really good player, exactly the type of player that Tottenham would need, and he may actually become more important than Kudus. In terms of Kudus, it was interesting. He started well at West Ham when he first went there, faded a little bit. If I'd have been Tottenham, I think I'd have been trying to get Jared Bowen out of West Ham before I tried to do the Kudus deal, but Thomas Frank will probably claim that he knows better than me about those things. Look, I'm always intrigued by Tottenham. They're a brilliant football club. It's never boring watching Tottenham, and I say that as a compliment, by the way. It was never boring under Postecoglou, and I don't expect it to be boring under Thomas Frank either. And those of us who dealt with Thomas do wish him well. He's a terrific guy. He's an absolutely terrific guy. He's a guy who keeps things in perspective, and that'll be very important when you're working at a place like Tottenham. What will be fascinating to see as the season unfolds is how Thomas deals with the spotlight that comes with being manager of Tottenham, because like it or not, it's not the same. Going from Brentford to Tottenham is like jumping into the ocean once, after having a gentle paddle upstream, frankly. And that would be really interesting to see how he deals with that as much as how he implements his own style onto that squad.
Yeah, you feel at times, Martin, during last season, Postecoglou perhaps found that difficult, or at least didn't enjoy the kind of attention and the media that he had to deal with by being Spurs manager. Do you expect a different approach from Thomas Frank?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said at the start of the Postecoglou reign at Tottenham, I enjoyed the way his teams played, but increasingly in year two, it was prickly. It was the journalist's fault. It was somebody else's fault. And it sat at a direct contrast to the fact that he wanted his teams to play with freedom and expression. And here was him very much buckling under that pressure, snapping at people. And Thomas Frank, as Ian said, that is always good to deal with. He's honest. He gives you a fair perspective of a game afterwards. I'm sure somebody told me years ago that a trainee teacher had been taught the first time you're in a classroom, tell somebody to open or shut a window to establish a little bit of authority inside that room straight away. The fact that he's had to go up Basuma for being late for this game and taking him out of this game is a really clever little trick to say, I might come across as a nice guy here, but I'm in control and you'll do things differently to how it was done before. That's taking a good player out of tonight's game. The interesting part stylistically are that we watch Arsenal, who last season and the season before are relying quite a lot on corners and throw-ins, and now we see a move that was never the case under Postecoglou, who railed against that in defeat against Arsenal. We now see the pragmatic Thomas Frank moving further towards that. So it's going to be a proper potential English game of football when those two giants clash during the season. It's just interesting to see, more compact. And I'm sure Postecoglou's sitting, kicking a chair somewhere going, Vicario's playing, Mickey van der Ven's playing, these players that he was desperate for last season but were never available. But the football club moves on relentlessly. His time is now in the past. This is Thomas Frank's time in charge, and they will play differently. And that was the big standout from tonight's game.
Yeah, like we just saw a copy of the back page of The Sun there, where they've labelled it the Blooper Cup. Spurs blowing a 2-goal lead to lose on penalties. Of course, that will be the headline. That will be the message particularly from opposing fans as well. But Ian, what can Spurs fans look forward to this coming season, do you think? As Martin said, Thomas Frank is likely to be more pragmatic. But can we expect a different Spurs going forward? Although what we saw from Spurs tonight might have been an old Spurs team.
You know what? It's interesting. The Postecoglou thing, by certainly the last 6 months of his time at Tottenham, had become a little bit of an untruth, to be fair. This kind of devil-may-care, expansive attitude to football, the high line, which, of course, we did see for the first year or so of Postecoglou's time, for good and for bad. He did try to change it. He did try to change it in the last 6 months. And one of his problems was that that didn't work either. Martin alluded to the injuries. He had lots of them. But equally, I saw Tottenham play poorly with all the players available on more than one occasion. And much as we all liked him, had lost his way long before the end of that season. And I think what Tottenham fans will hope for this season is actually quite an un-Tottenham type thing. What they will hope for is a little bit of dependability, because as much as they're a club that prides itself on, to dare is to do and all the rest of it, and it's all about the glory, and it is, but you know what? It's about winning. And Tottenham at times have embarrassed themselves. It's hard to say that about a team that's won the Europa League, right? But they did. They were embarrassing at times in the latter stages of Postecoglou's time. They did embarrassing things in their own penalty area. They lost by embarrassing margins in embarrassing ways. And that's hard for any fan base to take. And so I think moving forward, what Tottenham fans, again, as strange as it sounds, will look for this season is a little less of that, a little bit of credibility, a little bit of reliability, a bit of consistency, a little bit of knowing what the team are likely to do when they turn up on a Saturday or a Sunday, because they didn't have that under Postecoglou. They will have that under Thomas Frank. They will see quite soon how he will play. It will be slightly more functional for sure, but if it means that they don't ship 2 or 3 goals every time they step out at home, then that'll be a start.
Yeah, all eyes then on their opener against Burnley in the Premier League on Saturday. Ian, Martin, thank you for the moment. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll look at more of the sports stories in the morning's newspapers, including this in the Times. United are in no man's land, says Rashford. Stay with us.